everyone, and welcome to Wednesdays at Noon with PunkinFutz. I'm Lisa Radcliffe. I am the founder and CEO of PunkinFutz. I'm sitting in today for Shanique Ruiz. Shanique is fine. She just wasn't able to be here today, but she will be back in the coming weeks. I want to start by doing a shout out to all of the essential workers who are keeping us all safe through this pandemic. And that includes teachers and librarians and doctors and grocery store workers. And we appreciate you all very much. And because we appreciate you all so much, I'd like to ask everyone to please wear a mask. That's what we can do to do our part to help everyone through this pandemic. I will tell you that I am a middle-aged white woman with shoulder-length gray hair pulled back with gray glasses. I'm sitting in my kitchen living room with a red and brick wall behind me. And I'm really glad to be here with you all today. I'm going to introduce our guests today. I'm actually going to ask them each to introduce themselves, if they wouldn't mind. And so we can get started on this really excellent conversation. And Aisha, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Yes, so I'm really excited to be here with my friends and my new friend, Lisa. Sorry, Shanique's not here with us today. I am the director of the Pride program at the Office of Child Development, and I am an African-American woman. I am about coffee, maybe cinnamon-colored skin. I have purple eyeglasses and short curly hair. And I'm sitting in my living room with a couple of my beautiful paintings behind me, including one by Romare Bearden.
Nice. And Caitlin, if you wanted to go next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Forbes-Spear. I'm the director of the Literacy and Learning Division at the Office of Child Development, and I'm also the interim director of our evaluation and research team. I am a white woman. I'm about to turn 40. I have brown hair in a braid, just held around in dark blue glasses, and I'm sitting in a nook in my bedroom with a pale wall behind me with photographs of my children, and I have a window with curtains and a bureau on either side. It's very small.
Medina.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. Happy to be here. My name is Medina Jackson. I'm the Director of Engagement for the Pride program, and I am an early 40s Black woman with long red locks, wearing red lipstick, yellow shirt, and behind me is a brick wall with a Muhammad Ali poster on it that says, "Don't be good, be great."
That's perfect. Thank you. I'm really struck by the fact that we're all in our homes, which is just an interesting fact of the pandemic still. Well, it's such a broad series of things that you all do. So I was wondering if we could go back around again, and starting with Aisha, if you could tell us a little bit about what Pride is and about your guiding principles.
Yes, so PRIDE is an acronym for Positive Racial Identity Development in Early Education. And we have three primary goals for the PRIDE program. One is to support the development of positive racial identity among Black children aged 0 to 8. The second is to support the important adults in their lives by giving them the skills, the resources, and the knowledge that they need to support children in developing a positive racial identity. And our third goal is to raise awareness really broadly throughout the community about the ways in which young children are impacted by race. We have 4 guiding principles. The first is that race is central, and while people may want to talk about other things, we don't think that those other things should be ignored, but we want to stay focused on race because we understand its significance in America. The second is that we view children developing a positive racial identity as being central to their healthy development, not something that's an add-on. The third is we believe that a comprehensive approach to supporting young children and understanding race and developing a positive racial identity is key, which is why we have strategies that we use in the PRIDE program that focus on parents, focus on professionals, on the community, on the arts, and on research and evaluation. And then lastly, we think it's very, very important for us as a team to continue our learning and growing so that we what that means is that we are always reading articles, watching films, watching videos, and having conversations about them that grow our understanding of race and religion.
Can I ask you a follow-up question? How did you become involved in this work?
It was very serendipitous. The Pride program actually began because of one single email message, if you can believe that.
Wow.
So there was an email message that was sent to, at the time, the person who was my supervisor when I was working for a different program called Ready Freddie Pathways to Kindergarten Success. I won't tell the whole story, even though I love to tell it. We just don't have enough time today. That email led to us learning more and reading more about race for about 6 months. After that, we decided that we needed to do an environmental scan to assess positive racial identity in Pittsburgh. From the scan, we created a report. We had a press conference where we released it, and then we raised funds based on the recommendations that were in the final report. And so that led to the creation of the Pride program.
Wow, that's really cool. That's really, as you said, serendipitous. Yeah, I love things that happen like that, just sort of being in the right place
right
at the right time and being ready for it, being ready for the opportunity. It's something we talk about a lot at PunkinFutz. Excuse me, is being ready when that opportunity comes, being ready to take it. And so I'm going to switch over to Caitlin and ask you if you could tell us a little bit about the literacy and learning program. But I also heard you say, sorry, I wrote down, I take notes during this, but you also talked about evaluation and research. So if you could sort of talk to us a little bit about both.
Well, that'll be part of my how I got here story for sure. So the literacy and learning, we're a new division at the Office of Child Development. We probably started just about a year ago. I was up in my attic. We were officially in the pandemic, and it was sort of a lot of our projects were aligning in focused on literacy, and it kind of became, again, serendipitous and clear, and we have the flexibility to say, let's lean into this work here. So we're a new division. We are focused on creating literacy and learning opportunities that are rooted in a child's intersectional identities. And so when we're talking about that, we're really thinking about the ways in which both systemic and personal factors are impacting kids' learning. And then we're partnering with the important adults in their lives to help that and grow their learning and support their development. So this means partnering with schools, partnering with teachers, community organizations, families, but really thinking about all of those different pieces together. And in terms of how I got here, again, I started working at the Office of Child Development on our evaluation and research team. My background is in research. Actually, it is in literacy. And I was a special education teacher before that. And so our evaluation and research team does amazing work really centering community voice. We do a lot of community-driven evaluation projects, which is really exciting. But that means really focusing on lots of different topics, right? It's based on what communities are interested in understanding, and then using research and evaluation methods to address that and solve problems of practice, which is what drew me to the Office of Child Development, just that applied context for research and evaluation. But we have one major project right now where we really got to lean into this focus on literacy and race. And again, I'm so appreciative that we work at a place that kind of supports our growing and learning and us being able to lean into this edge and say, this is something that's needed in our community. And so let's do something about it. And so that's really where we've come from.
Yeah. Let me ask a question about that. There are two things that strike me. But the first one is, how do you find out what a community wants to know? I mean, are there avenues that you use to find that out?
Well, you two can probably speak more to this, but we do use a lot of scan methods to ask these questions and really make sure that's the root of where we're coming from. But do you two want to speak about the Pride scan that you all did?
And what is a scan? I'm sorry, because I don't know, and I don't need to be off script, but I'm fascinated.
No.
Well, it was my first experience in working on an environmental scan. That term was foreign to me before we started. And essentially what it meant was taking bits and pieces of information acquired through various methods and pulling them all together. And so our environmental scan included focus groups with parents. We had 4 different focus groups with parents, focus groups with educators, We also did an extensive literature review. We did an extensive review of resources online because we were trying to see what resources are available for parents if they want to help children, for teachers if they want to help children. We conducted an online survey. We pulled together an advisory committee, and it just, again, this is serendipitous. One of the members of our team was doing research in Pittsburgh Public Schools looking at race in early education. And so we pulled information from there. And we also talked to people who we consider to be thought leaders. We asked them a series of questions, and then we had to pull all that information together. And from that, we wrote the report. We came to some conclusions, and then we had some really important recommendations at the end. It was the recommendations that we used to apply for our initial funding.
Nice. Wow, that's quite a process. That's a huge process. And I had another thing that Caitlin mentioned that you also mentioned, Aisha, that I think might help us in introducing Medina, what Medina does. I keep hearing both of you saying partnering with the adults in their lives. And I really love that. You know, the idea that you really need to, you can't just focus on the child. You really need to think about the support around that child. And you talk, every time you talk about, you know, sort of the support that's needed for the adult and the adults, plural, in that child's life. And so Medina, I don't know, that might be a good segue. If you could tell our audience what you do as the, I wrote it down, the Director of Engagement for the Pride Program.
Okay, as the Director of Engagement, it's my responsibility to essentially make sure that people know who we are and create partnerships and opportunities for families, community members, stakeholders to connect with and engage with our work. So I can tell you a little bit about our programs. You know, we're a small and mighty team here. Aisha and I are the only full-time program staff for the Pride program. So a lot of the work that we do side by side next to each other, or alongside each other, I'll say. So in terms of our programs, we have our arts strategy where we engage the community in pop-up mini art festivals that are neighborhood based in 3 neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, the Hill District, Homewood, and East Liberty. And these are really, really fun, engaging, culturally immersive events where at the center of the events are early childhood educator and Africana artist pairs who create arts activities to help young children and their families learn about their culture, learn about their heritage, and gain some positive racial identity. So that's the core of the event, but surrounded by those activities are things that just young children like, you know, bubble stations, face painting, DJs and music, free food and things like that, and as well as interactive, developmentally appropriate performances. So those are really successful events that have exceeded our expectations in regards to the turnout, which just really showed how needed and how necessary folks feel like those pop-up mini art festivals are. And like Aisha mentioned before, all of our program ideas came from really surveying and talking to the community and seeing what folks wanted. We also have our speaker series events. We've had to go virtual, right? Like so many folks have done since COVID-19. But before that, they were in-person events where we have local and national experts around race and early childhood come and, you know, speak to an audience about their expertise in a topic at hand. So we've had Beverly Daniel Tatum, we've had the Dean of the School of Education at Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Valerie Kinlock, Dr. April Baker Bell talking about AAVE, and, you know, several other folks. We also have a parent village. So that's our parent and caregiver strategy, where again, we partner with family support centers in Homewood, East Liberty, and the Hill District in Pittsburgh to talk about ways that they can engage their children to help them learn and embrace their racial identity, to help them feel good about being Black, as well as getting in touch with their own racial journeys and narratives, and the things that they've learned and the experiences that they've had. So we talk about skin tone, we talk about hair texture, we talk about ways to connect with and communicate with your child and racial bullying. We talk about Africa and the diaspora, and then, ways to resist and ways that we've always resisted, to leave on a note of empowerment. We also have professional development that we offer in our professional development.
Oops. I don't know if Medina, I might have lost you for a moment.
Yes, her screen is frozen.
All right. Well, we'll bring it back as quickly as possible. But while I've got to tell you first, while she's talking and I'm thinking about the fact that it's just two of you working on all these programs, I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted just by listening to it. Maybe you could tell us, she used a term AAVE. I don't know what that is. Could you maybe tell us what that is?
Yes, AAVE is the acronym.
I don't know whether to keep talking or not.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry, we lost you for a moment, Medina.
Before you start, Medina, Lisa wanted to know what AAV is before you continue. Oh, now we lost you again.
It's technology.
AAVE is an acronym for African American Vernacular English. So a couple years ago, as the director of the program, I made a decision that, I had mentioned earlier that we do ongoing learning. So we're always reading and talking. And I made a decision that we would spend the entire year learning about African American Vernacular English, sometimes referred to as Ebonics, Black English, African American English. And we watched a film called Talking Black in America. We read multiple articles, watched multiple videos, and just learned a whole lot more. Everybody was pretty much blown away by what we learned. And what we did with that learning was take it to our entire Office of Child Development, which includes 5 or 6 divisions. And we actually showed the film multiple times to staff, and we had conversations about it. We actually used it also in our monthly sessions together, where we had activities where people could actually dig a little bit deeper into understanding AAVE, including reading a couple of picture books that use African American Vernacular English in them. And so our learning has continued to grow in that area. Medina, you can continue with professional development.
One follow-up question. I'm sorry. So the film was Talking Black in America?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. I just want to make sure I wrote it down properly.
Okay.
So go ahead, Medina. I'm sorry. You were talking about professional development.
Oh no.
Oh, she's frozen. Okay. She says she's having connection issues.
Yeah, it happens. This is the thing. So I'll just share a backstory that you all know, because we had it right before we came on. There was construction that started right next to where I am, and so I had to pick up and move. It's just that's part of the challenge of working from home and technology and the pandemic. So
yeah, I can tell you about professional development while Medina gets reconnected. So she was about to describe our professional development model, which includes 5 different modules. We think is very important for anyone who's learning about race and young children to also understand race, the history of race and racism in America. So our 5 modules include learning about the history of race and racism in America, doing your internal work, working on yourself, learning about race in your profession, which a lot of people don't learn, even though they may go through getting a bachelor's and master's and even PhD. They might not learn about race in their profession. And then fourthly, they learn about race and young children specifically. And then on our final module, we try to help people take all that they've learned, pull it all together, and come up with their own plan for applying what they've learned to their work, to their future work.
So in following up on that, let's talk about race and young children for a moment. Can you, and Caitlin, I guess we'll start with you. If you could help us understand, why is talking about race with young children so important? Help us all understand that.
Yeah, I think it's vitally important, and Aisha can jump in at any point. But the way I think about it, and when I'm talking about this with teachers in particular or parents, is we need to understand first that race is socially constructed, right? It's a human-made idea that differences based on skin color, and it's used to justify inequities. What I say to my own children, who are 8 and 5, and we're talking about this, they're mixed race, and we have a lot of conversations about this, is that, race is completely made up and oh so very real. And we need to understand that and help them understand it. It's a hard idea. A lot of adults don't get that. Medina mentioned earlier Beverly Daniel Tatum. So she talks about racism in terms of smog, right? It's in the air all around us. We breathe it in, and we have no choice, right? It's there. It's in all these messages. It's in our interactions. It's in our books. It's in our TV. It's everywhere. Social media. And we often get pushback around this idea about talking about race with young children or in early childhood contexts, this idea that kids are too young. But developmentally, there's really no such thing. There's some really interesting research that we've been able to dig into, right? That babies as young as 3 and 6 months notice differences in skin color. Around ages 1 and 2, there's really interesting research showing kids making reasoning about behavior based on race, often showing same race preferences. But something happens around the time kids are 2.5 or 3, I think, right, Aisha, where they start to sort of take on the biases of larger cultures. And it's not a done deal, but if we don't intervene, if we're not having these conversations, if kids aren't having cross-racial relationships and seeing all of these things, those patterns that start at 2.5 can become really deeply entrenched. So it's a really important place to start. The smog is there, kids are breathing it in, and they're noticing it. And when we don't talk it, again, we actually make those patterns worse. So I think talking about it as they make sense of the world, right? That is what they are doing when they're that little. We can help them. We can help them see it and name it and understand it and push back about it, ask questions, and eventually, as Medina said, start to disrupt it and be empowered they are empowered, and just support that empowerment process that they can tear it down. So I think
it's really interesting to hear you talk about it as a societal construct as well as a fact. That it is both. And I'll tell you, we talk about disability that way. So in my mind, my opinion, disability is really created by the structures we've created for our own convenience. And I can see the parallels. I think, when you all were talking earlier about intersectionality, I know it's something that is really an important topic for us at PunkinFutz, because so many of our community's members deal with that intersectionality of race and disability, of gender and race and disability, or whatever a person's individual lived experience is. So maybe Aisha, if I could follow up and ask if there are, what do you see as some positive ways that parents can support, or a community can support a positive racial identity, the development of a positive racial identity for a child?
So I'll start with parents. I'll have to give a little bit of thought about what the community can do. But in terms of parents, the primary thing that parents can and should do is their own racial learning and reflecting. And I've been interviewed and asked that question numerous times, and it feels to me like people are really surprised that I say the parents should start with themselves. And then they continue to ask me questions, what should they do with kids? Well, don't do anything with kids. Do something with yourself first. And what that means is you at least begin with a more solid foundation, because if you've done at least a little bit of research, you'll be better prepared to answer the questions that children will have for you. But the other thing you'll do is you'll be starting a conversation with them that is much more authentic and one that is much more personal. And so, for example, if a parent does some of that reflecting on their own racial journey, they could start their conversation by talking to their child and saying things like, when I grew up, we never talked about this when I was younger. My parents didn't talk about it. I don't think they knew how to talk about it. But now I see that it really is important. And I want to learn about it, and I want to have conversations with you about it. And then from there, they can start to use more resources. But the primary thing is to begin by doing that personal work first, so that your conversations that you have with your children are organic and honest and authentic.
are there some questions that we could start with? If I were to start, if this were something that I were just starting out with, what questions would I ask myself? Can you give me a couple that would be a really good place for a person to start with that exploration of their own personal position and learning and understanding of racial identity?
Yeah, so in our work at the Pride program, we also have been doing a video, what's it called again, Caitlin? Video?
My racial journey, what are you?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
the video coding. We've been doing video coding.
Yep.
Yes. And so we came up with this framework for viewing these videos of students. I don't have time to go into the details. Maybe we can have a side conversation later. But we've been looking at things like racial knowledge, racial communication, racial beliefs, and for teachers, racial teaching. So racial knowledge means, so the first question is, what do I know about race? And most people don't know a lot about it. I don't know a lot about it, even though I've been reading about it and talking about it for years. There's so much out there. I don't even know that much. And then secondly, how do I feel about it? What are my feelings? And then what are my beliefs? So they can start to begin to do those kinds of, ask themselves those kinds of questions as the beginning of the process of exploring their own personal ideas and attitudes and views. And understanding, because very often the problem is that we don't really know much. So we make a lot of assumptions. And I'm always reading something and finding something out new that I didn't know. And, being really eager to share it with people, which I do through my work. But I think that it's an example of how there's so much out there about race that we don't know. And how, because as a country, we have not had these conversations, people have not been inclined to do the research and understand the history.
I really appreciate that. That's very, I'm sorry, go ahead, Caitlin. Go, please.
I was just going to piggyback on that because I think, again, when we're thinking about this work with teachers, we always say it's your head and heart work that comes first. But we use picture books because we think they are really helpful for kids, but also we start with the teachers. Like, you have work to do. You're not reading this cold. This is not actually for the kid at first. It's for you. And when I've done trainings with Aisha, I love this. That question of how does that make you feel is so important because we don't usually give it time and space. And I've seen particularly white teachers or white respondents really not know how to answer that or not be willing to engage in that emotionally. If we're reading a book that's about really intense racial bullying and we're like, well, that makes me think about, like it's this intellectualizing process and really forcing us to explore that. And so I think there are some individuals who can do this and read and grapple, but I also think that process of having someone help put you in that place of thinking about these things and seeing those gaps, right? A lot of this, particularly why I think it's so important to have these conversations with kids, it's kind of like you said, Aisha, it's that unlearning, right? Like, I didn't have this as a kid. I want to start it differently. But if I'm in the position of unlearning and I'm trying to teach you, that becomes really, it's fraught. There's a lot of those layers. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's also this tension of not getting frozen and saying, I have to get it perfect, because we want kids to know they can talk about this. And knowing that we can potentially, we have to do that prep work and to have thought about it and be open to coming back and owning mistakes and thinking about it and growing and learning. So there's a lot of layers in it. And I think different people learn in different ways. But I personally like using picture books, at least with teachers, because I think it forces them to think about kids. But we do it in a way where it's like, we're not using this for kids yet. This is about our learning for now.
I really appreciate having this conversation with you both. And I'm sorry that I'll tell everyone, Medina's having some technical problems, so she's not going to be able to rejoin us. But I appreciate these conversations because back to this idea of unlearning. Those of us, I'm in my 50s, this was not something that was ever talked about. And this was not something that was part of our educational process. When I was growing up, it just wasn't. There was nothing talked about race at all. And so the idea of having to go back and unlearn, 50 years of learning is a profound process. And I think it's only if we continue to talk. It's something that PunkinFutz is incredibly committed to. this idea of providing safe spaces for these conversations to try and change the ongoing learning process, to make it accessible for the community at large. So I appreciate you all being willing to do this. So Caitlin, I'm going to follow up just in talking about literacy and what the connection is between literacy and racial equity. If you could speak to that for just a moment.
Sure. And I have little people running in and out as I speak. I apologize for any extra noise.
That's always the best type of people to have running in and out.
It's true. So when I think about literacy and racial equity, it's multifaceted. There's so many layers to this. For the Literacy and Learning Division, when we're really thinking about this, we're thinking about literacy through this racial equity lens. That's something part of our kind of approach to things. We're really thinking about the questions of how is literacy defined, who is given access to that literacy, and then what does access look like? So there's lots of layers within that even. But I think literacy, again, is often conceptualized as just the skills that are needed for reading and writing, right? And those are super important. We actually focus a lot on those, but like phonological awareness and phonics and vocabulary and comprehension and all of those pieces. But when we're also thinking about literacy, we're thinking about it in this broader sense of it's a tool, right, for reading the world. And there are multiple forms of literacy and multiple types of literacy. Some of which have been barred historically, right, for thinking about racial equity from Black and African American people in our country for a huge amount of our history, right? And so this notion of what counts as literacy in schools and what gets taught, whose literacy is valued, what forms of literacy, those are questions we're certainly grappling with, and just asking teachers to think about. We're also fully aware, there are major inequities, racial inequities in literacy outcomes, even if we're just focusing on the reading and writing parts of things across our country that we need to address and understand and think about, again, who gets access to those and what does it look like? What does the instruction look like? What is being taught? But I think that disconnect or the specific focus is also something we really want to push our teachers to think about, because if kids are coming into school contexts, having been in environments where different types of literacies are celebrated or used to communicate, and then only one way is being taught or valued or even recognized in schools, that's something we want to push back on. And I think when Aisha's talking about AAVE and we're thinking about languages, right, there's a huge relationship there between language and literacy. And again, do teachers recognize and value the languages that kids and families are speaking and using to make meaning? And how is that literacy? So there's a lot of layers to that. And I think we can look at it and think about it in all these different ways, but that's sort of at the heart of some of the questions we're asking when we're thinking about it.
Can I, do you find that schools are able to invest? So you were talking, in order to deliver this type of support for children, you really have to start with the teachers. You have to start with the administrators. You have to start with their racial learning and their understanding and the position, what they're bringing to that classroom. Do you find that schools have the resources to invest in this and the willingness to do the work? Are you finding that as you go into the community?
There's a range. I will say right this year we are in 6 schools, and we were very strategic in these partners we found, but we're really thinking about, are there district level and administration level supports as well as teacher buy-in, and none of them look the same. That's the part. All of those things have to be addressed, and what works in one school is not going to work in another school. But thinking about readiness and openness and different levers into that, those are things we're certainly considering. I think there's not a cookie cutter approach that works. I certainly don't think we can say, I know plenty of schools where this is not the case, but I do think 2020, I've been doing this work and teaching classes and teaching teachers around issues around race and special education for a while now. And I will say, I'm not naive, but I think there is an openness to at least acknowledging we need to think about this a lot more. I don't know, Aisha, if you're seeing differences or what your thoughts are on that. But
yeah, so most of the what I've been experiencing since last summer, when lots and lots of people were protesting the murder of George Floyd, was, a huge spike in people wanting to have an interview so I could tell parents how to talk to kids about race. So that's what happened. Of course, I knew that would die down, and it has died down, although the interest among organizations for training has not died down. So there is still interest among organizations and institutions. But I think part of the issue is what people are looking for. And again, I'll go back to that question you asked about what can parents do. It's the same thing for teachers. They have to begin to work on themselves, and they don't expect you to say that to them when they come to you. They think that you're going to kind of give them a whole bunch of information that then they can give to children. And that's not what, I mean, that's part of it, but that's, in my opinion, not the most significant part of it.
Yeah, so when we're partnering with schools, we're really trying to think about these structural issues of racism specifically, but ableism, any of those sort of isms that are at play, that they all operate on multiple levels and are interconnected. And so, as I said, it's not a cookie cutter approach, but it's finding pathways in, because I think you can partner with teachers who are willing and committed and can kind of grow change that way. Partnering with administrators who can support and change policies is important. And then creating a community that can see those inequities and react to them. That is the end goal. And knowing that all of those levels are there and that they shift and move, that it's really complicated. But I think, as Aisha's saying, like finding those starting points and those partners who are willing to fully commit is really important, and recognizing.
Yeah, and Lisa, I wanted to come back to the second part of your question from that you asked me about what can parents do, what can the community do, and in terms of the community, I think a lot of what needs to happen. When I think about community, for whatever reason, the community of Homewood comes to mind for me. I used to live in Homewood, and so it's made up of lots of different people doing lots of different things. It's a pretty if you compare Homewood 1960s to the current day, it's kind of pretty decimated. There was a whole lot more there back in the 60s than there is now. But there's still people who are doing important work and lots of families there. And what I think needs to happen with the community is that there's a need for them to become a lot more aware and enlightened about the ways that race impacts young children. Because I think people are very aware of race in general and racism in general, but not the way it kind of intersects with young children. And I think that's for a number of reasons. That exists for a number of reasons. One of which is because early education is typically pushed to the side and considered less important anyway. And so that's the case with communities, whether they intend that to be the case or not. But I think really what they need to understand better is when you're looking at this child and you're supporting this child, think about the fact that they are immersed in a racist society and how that affects them and what you can do to support them and to support their families.
I really appreciate that. I keep bringing all of this back to sort of my personal experience. Excuse me. One of the things I'm like Caitlin was saying, I'm hopeful at this moment that we have an opportunity. I'm concerned with what you're saying, Aisha, which is, there was a moment where everybody was, paying attention and everything quiets down now. I think it's really important for us to all push on this, for every single one of us to push on this. And when you say about the early education piece and the importance of that early education piece, it really, for me personally, I have two children who both have adaptive needs, who both have very different adaptive needs. And one of them received early intervention services and the other one did not. And the change in the outcomes was spectacular. And so if I just think about it from my own experience, my own lived experience, I can see the difference it made to get the type of resources and support to that child before some of that learning was fully ingrained, when they could still adapt and change more easily. And for those of us who are well past that age, I know we're going to run out of time, so I don't want to miss this chance to ask. So can you, in learning more about the Pride program, in learning more about education and literacy and race, are there some resources that you could point us to, or ways that our audience can learn more about the really important work that you do?
Yeah, so of course I would refer people to our Pride website, which is www.racepride.pitt.edu, where they can learn more information about the programming that we offer, as well as some of the research information that we have available. The environmental scan/report that I referenced is available on our website if people want to access it and read it. But there's one, and Caitlin, you can probably add some more, one resource that I highly recommend, and that's Embrace Race. You may be aware of them. And if you just do a Google search for Embrace Race, you'll find them. It's a couple, a male and a female. I'm not sure if they're married, so I won't say a married couple. I'm not sure.
But yes, I don't know.
Yeah. And they created Embrace Race as a online platform. For me, it felt like they were really smart to do that even before COVID, so that they follow the same format that they've always been following. They've invited some of the most interesting and knowledgeable guests to be available for webinars, and they have lots of written material, so I would highly recommend Embrace Race. What about you?
I love Embrace Race. I think they're a wonderful resource. And really, I mean, I like that they are focused at parents, because I think, but it's still accessible to teachers or all adults. Again, that lens of, we also talk about, the universe of the child is the family. And so if we're only focusing on the child, we're missing out on so many opportunities to impact development. And I really think they embody that vision really well. For teachers, I think Learning for Justice, which used to be, I think, Teaching for Tolerance, is another great resource if teachers were looking for that, or practitioners. Yeah.
And another one for teachers, I believe they provide resources for K through 12, and that's Facing History and Ourselves. I'll repeat that, Facing History and Ourselves. They have lots of resources available. Since the pandemic, they've begun to also have guest speakers. They have a guest speaker tonight who I am a big fan of, and that's Dr. Eddie Glaude, who a lot of people may know about. He's going to be on their webinar today. So I'll be watching that tonight at 7. I'm sure they didn't ask me to put that plug in, but I am. I'm such a fan.
Their rates are going to spike. Good.
And I'm writing it all down. So
yeah. Yeah, but I think the important thing for people to do when they're searching for resources is to figure out a way to kind of analyze, have these people been around for a long time? Have they been doing this for a long time? Are they reputable? And then also, is it really an organization or institution and not somebody with just a bright idea? And I'll give you an example of how that might not work. I was doing some research to find activities that would help parents or teachers to talk to children, do activities with children around race. And I found a series of about 3 of them. I don't think any of them were really very good. And instead of not using them, I instead used them in training and asked the trainees to critique the activity. And so it was a learning process for them, but it was also a way to show them what you find on the internet might not be what you're really looking for. It may not really get at the really serious, deep issues of race that we want to help children better understand.
Well, I appreciate this hugely. This has been an amazing set of resources that you provided. And I really appreciate your being willing to have this conversation with us today. Because as you said, as we believe, having these conversations is the only way to change the future. And we need to start with ourselves. And this is our process with PunkinFutz in trying to support that conversation and this learning for everyone. So thank you all very much. I'm going to say goodbye. I'm sorry about the sound feedback right there. I'm just making sure there are no questions in the comments before we go. Nope, I think we're good. And we have an email that we can reach you at, Aisha, I believe. And thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Aisha. If you could please tell Medina that we really appreciate her as well. And I love the programming she does with arts. I'm so taken with this idea. we really believe that if you make stuff fun, that people can actually learn in the process, and they don't even realize the learning that is happening. And what she does, her programming embodies that fully. So I love the work you're doing. Thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to seeing everybody soon back on Friday for recess. Anyway, take care. Thank you.